The wreckage barely rocked. The sea had grown thick and still, like frozen air. The sun scorched their skin, burning into their lips until salt crusted them dry. 3 of them were on the raft. 1 piece of cloth, not a single drop of water. They didn't know each other's names. Only the breathing, audible in the crackling silence. And a sound, like the tap of a single raindrop striking the taut triangle of fabric. Someone whispered, "I saw my father do this. I must have been 6." No one replied, but they remembered. 3 on the reef. Sometimes the smallest memory keeps you afloat. On the 5th day, the sea went still. No wind, no waves, just heat and light. Blinding, steady, endless. The wrecked yacht, lashed together with rope, creaked with every movement. Debris floated nearby. A melted ring, a charred seat, an overturned container, whatever hadn't sunk. Mark sat with his knees pulled to his chest, not from cold, from the thought that there was no point moving anymore. He didn't ask for the time. Everything had already been counted. On the 2nd day, the water ran out. On the 3rd, the flare burned out. On the 4th, the transmitter went silent. Today, there was only heat, no shade, no sound. Across the raft, the woman worked a rope. Her fingers were blistered, her wrists wrapped in cloth. From the very beginning, she hadn't said a word. The 3rd, a man in a red jacket, barely moved. Burns covered his chest. His breathing was shallow, irregular. He still clung to the edge of the raft, as if holding on to land. A corner of a leather wallet peeked from beneath his zipper. He hadn't let go, even now. When something flickered in the sky, the sun was already tilting. Possibly a plane, but it didn't descend, didn't slow. None of them reacted. The raft cast no shadow, as if they didn't exist, not on the water, not under the sky. And that's when Mark remembered, not a name, not a job, but how once, as a child, his father spread an old sail over the fence behind the house and said, laughing, "The trick is the angle, then everything drains to the center." Back then, it seemed silly. Now, it was the only thing to hold on to. He looked around. A faded scrap of fabric flapped at the edge of the raft, a piece of sail. The sun beat into his eyes, salt stung his lips, but the cloth quivered in the breeze. And it was the first sound in a long time that didn't hurt. There were no more words. They had run out by the 2nd day, along with the hope of rescue. No one asked for names, not because they didn't want to know, but because names didn't matter here. A name lives in the future, and here, under the burning sky, the future had shrunk to a matter of hours. Mark gave them names in his head. The woman with the ropes, Rope. She tied knots from belts, shirts, life vest straps. Her hands trembled. The skin on her fingers was cracked, her wrists locked with cramps. Sometimes her lips moved, as if she were counting or praying, but no words came. Only the motion, loop, pull, knot. The man in the red jacket, he barely spoke. His face was burned, his breathing erratic, his lips cracked and bleeding, but he still gripped the edge of the raft and the wallet on his chest. Someone else might have tossed it to keep it out of the way. He held on. Mark was somewhere in between, without a name, without a role, just the one who stayed in the middle. He had taken the boat trip because he didn't want to be home. There, everything reminded him of what couldn't be fixed. Here, at least things still depended on action. The raft creaked as if suffering under the heat. Salt had eaten into their skin. The air stood still like a wall. Every movement came with pain, like needles in his fingers, sand under the skin. Sometimes someone would reach toward the water, wanting to touch, to cool off. But the water burned, only worsened the thirst. A container floated by, an old first aid kit, empty, pointless, like a thought without strength. Mark stared at it and felt something inside him begin to crack. Not fear, something else. Fear of losing thought, of becoming a body that breathes, but no longer remembers why. And suddenly a voice, dry, broken, reflex, drinking sea, Brain gets confused. Don't give in. Jacket. He spoke like a doctor or someone who used to be responsible for others. Even here. Mark nodded. He understood. The water called. Hot, gleaming, lethal. Rope suddenly stopped, looked at him. He didn't understand at first until he noticed her hands were shaking, and then he said, "I know how to make a filter." He didn't think, he just remembered. Sail, angle, fold, water collecting into a jar. They didn't respond, but they listened. Because when words run out, someone still has to act. He didn't know how to do it properly. Only vague images from childhood. A sail stretched between branches. A fold. A jar slowly filling with water. Back then, it was a game. Now, it was everything that remained. He looked at the cloth. A sun-bleached piece of sail, scorched with ash-like edges. Light as air. Fragile. Too flimsy to hold shape. Too important not to try. Rope silently handed him a piece of aluminum rod. He didn't ask where it came from. She didn't explain. They worked together. Wordlessly. They tied the fabric to the wreck, one post from a broken mast, the other from a rescue ring frame. Beneath, they placed a plastic bowl. Everything wobbled, creaked, held. Mark folded the edge to shape a funnel. Every movement echoed with pain. His fingers were numb, as if needles were lodged inside them. His wrists clicked dryly, like the joints had dried out. The fabric crackled like old leather. He could feel his own skin splitting, on his palms, lips, behind his ears. He whispered, "Tom, the angle is the key, so it flows to one spot." And he made the bend. The sky was clear, no sign of rain, but the raft seemed to hold its breath. Jacket didn't move, only his eyes open, staring at the sky or the sail. A voice came, unexpected, like from the shadows. 1 milliliter per hour for an adult, 10 minimum, too little, but not 0. And another followed, raspy, female with a crack in it. "Do you always count everything?" Not an accusation, a habit. He didn't reply. Rope sat holding the line, as if steering a boat that no longer existed. Everyone had their own way of holding on. They waited, listened to the silence, not full but crackling. Burns crackled on their skin. Salt burst in the corners of their mouths. And in that silence, the fabric fluttered. A weak gust passed over the raft. The edge of the sail shivered. Mark froze and heard a sound. One, short, as if a drop or a thought fell into the void. He looked at the bowl. Dry. But it didn't matter, because now they had a what. They didn't know when, didn't know why. But there was a what, a piece of cloth, stretched, and it held. They waited, not because they believed. There was simply nothing else to do. The sail hung like a shadow, neither up nor down. The cloth stirred barely, like it was breathing along with Jacket. His breathing had become almost inaudible. Mark stopped counting the hours. In the humid heat, time didn't move. It clung to the body, to the skin, to the eyes. There were no clouds. The heat hung like a flat lid over the ocean. Everything seemed baked. The raft, the air, the thought. Mark stared at the makeshift rig. Fold, angle, bowl, all correct, just like in childhood. But the bowl empty, not a drop, not a hint. He felt something boil inside him, not suddenly, but thickly, as if everything inside had stuck together from salt. He wanted to hit something, throw the bowl, scream. But his mouth was dry, his teeth ground together. He only clenched his fists and felt the skin crack between his fingers. Rope was watching. She didn't speak, but her eyes asked, "Will it work?" He shrugged, said nothing. How do you explain that faith isn't a feeling? It's what you give others when you no longer have it yourself. The sun sank lower. The sail's shadow slid across Jacket's cheek. He opened his eyes. His lips moved. Dry, strained. "If you lied, hit me, then I thought I saw something wet." Mark leaned in, looked into the bowl. It was empty, completely, but Jacket had seen a drop, and that was enough for him to keep breathing. Mark looked up, at the sky, blue, flawless, not a trace. There'll be no rain, he thought, but the sails still hung, the system stood, and now it was part of them. Morning came without warning. No coolness, no clouds. Only light, sharp, merciless. It struck the eyes like a shot and left shadows behind the lids. The raft creaked with every movement. Rope lay motionless. Her face was covered, hands hidden beneath a faded t-shirt. Jacket was in the same position as yesterday, only now he didn't groan, didn't even seem to breathe. Mark leaned in, a pulse, barely there. But there, he said nothing. His throat was dry, his tongue stuck to his palate. Not from thirst, from futility. Words no longer worked, no longer mattered. Only actions remained. He looked at the cloth. It held, dried out, scorched, but still in place. Taut, stubbornly, like them. He stepped toward the bowl, just to check, without hope, a ritual, and he saw it, a spot, wet, barely visible like a fingerprint on glass. He froze, stepped closer. At the bottom, a drop, clear, alive, like an eye or an answer. He didn't touch it right away, just looked. And in that silence, he heard a small sound, plop, the fabric's touch, a slide, center, into the bowl. He closed his eyes. His father, the yard, the sail. The trick is the angle. He took the cap from an empty tube, gently dipped it into the bowl. The moist rim trembled in the sunlight. He held the cap to Jacket's lips. He didn't understand at first. Then, he drank, almost without awareness, like a breath. Behind him, a rustle. Rope pushed herself up on her elbows, rasping, barely audible. "You give him, then me." He nodded, no strength for word, but his eyes remained. He bent down again, waited. The second drop took longer, but it came. He caught it, brought it to Rope's lips. She didn't thank him, just closed her eyes, and then he understood. As long as the bowl remained, there was order. A cue, time, and someone to serve another. There was no rain, no storms, no thunder, no gray clouds. Only rare drops, as if someone far away released them by hand. But the sail still hung, tattered, faded, alive. It accepted every drop, even those that evaporated midair. Still, something remained. Once an hour, sometimes two at once. Mark collected them, into a cap, into the plastic dip of an old container. He didn't drink, he shared. Jacket first. He didn't open his eyes, but he drank, sometimes with a jolt, sometimes like in sleep. Rope refused at first, then took it without looking. Just shook her head as if apologizing. Her lips were whiter than the cloth, but her fingers still moved. Loop, knot, pull, without stopping, without purpose. Mark drank last, if there was any left. His hand trembled, knees buckled. A hum rang in his ears. His mind drifted like a gull above the waves, closer then farther. But he kept going, scooping, offering, sharing, in silence. He no longer looked at the sky. He just did what had to be done. One drop, one step. The cloth caught water. He caught the drops. One evening, Jacket whispered, hoarsely in broken pauses, "You could have kept it. No one would have known." Mark didn't reply, just pulled the bowl closer to the center, adjusted the fold in the cloth. No words, no glance. Silence hung. Rope watched, then said, "I know." Simply, no reproach, no thanks. Recognition, quiet. She tied a knot right on her shirt, then bound it with thread. It stayed there in the middle, like a mark. On the sixth day, the raft shifted. A weak current. Somewhere ahead something blinked, or seemed to, but it didn't matter anymore. They had become different, even if the water ran out. The sail still hung, and the drops still came. Rarely, but they came. When they were found, the sun was already setting. The rescue boat approached slowly. No one on the raft moved. 3. One was lying down. One sat with knees hugged to chest. The third held the fabric, with 2 fingers, like something too fragile to drop. The rescuers didn't realize at first if they were alive, but Jacket opened his eyes, rope blinked, and Mark stood slowly and unhooked the sail. On board, they were wrapped in foil blankets, given water, asked questions. Their names were recorded, their families contacted. No one asked about the cloth. The sail remained on the raft. Among the wreckage, it still held. 2 months passed. Mark returned home. The house felt smaller, quieter. Sometimes he heard not the sound, but the memory of a sound, a drop falling into a bowl. He went to the old marina where boats were once repaired, found a roll of fabric, leftover sail. He sewed, clumsily, but with his own hands, hung it outside his window, at an angle, so it would drain to the center. And the first evening it rained, not a shower, just scattered drops. He didn't go inside. He sat on the porch. He wasn't waiting, wasn't thinking, just sat. Water dripped from the gutter. Rarely but precisely, one drop landed in the dog's bowl. Then, another. He didn't move. Beside him on the railing lay an old jacket. It smelled of salt, or memory. In his hand was a scrap of that same fabric, dry, faded at the edges. He looked at it, like something that shouldn't matter, but still remained. He set it beside the bowl and kept sitting. This time, he didn't divide it, he just stayed.